Move this over. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited that you're here tonight. If you don't mind just muting your mics, and you can keep your video going. We really want to build community. We'll just be spotlighting the speakers when it comes time for them to be doing their part of the event. I'm Max Fraser, as you can see, and my Birchbark editing partner, Kat Purnell, and I want to thank you for coming tonight to our InConversation event, which is, of course, featuring Donald Anderson and Brian Turner. We hope you'll keep an eye out on our events page on our Birchbark editing website, because we have some great authors coming up, including Naomi Ayala and E. Ethelbert Miller together, Elaine Fletcher Chapman and Albert Abonado, as well as Martha Cooley and Deirdre McNamer. So these are some great events that we have coming. We'd love to keep literary conversations open and voices heard, so please consider donating to Birchbark Editing on our homepage. We're so excited to be hosting Donald Anderson and Brian Turner for a talk about memoir and process and whatever you ask. If you watch the chat function as I'm introducing the authors, you'll be able to find helpful links being put up to their websites, as well as where to purchase their books. And again, just be sure that you mute your mics and let Donald and Brian be the people who are talking. I'm going to do a brief bios on both of them, and then I'll turn it over to them for the reading and the conversation. Donald Anderson's most recent book, Fragments of a Mortal Mind, was published in April this year and has been described as a bold and innovative nonfiction novel that changes the way we see ourselves and the world around us. His fiction and essays have appeared in the North American Review, Fiction International, Epoch, PRISM International, Western Humanities Review, Columbia, Michigan Quarterly Review, Connecticut Review, and elsewhere. Since 1989, he's been editor of War, Literature, and the Arts, and the International Journal of the Humanities, He's editor too of Aftermath, an anthology of post-Vietnam fiction, Andre Dubus Tributes, and When War Becomes Personal, Soldiers' Accounts from the Civil War to Iraq. In 1996, he received a Creative Writers Fellowship grant from the National Endowment of the Arts for the Arts. He holds an MFA from Cornell University. A former Air Force officer, he now lives in Colorado, where he directs creative writing at the United States Air Force Academy. Welcome, Donald. Reading and speaking with Donald tonight is Brian Turner. His latest book, My Life as a Foreign Country, a memoir, has been called Achingly, Disturbingly, Shockingly Beautiful by Nick Flynn, and a humane, heartbreaking, and expertly crafted work of literature by Tim O'Brien. Turner has also written 2 collections of poetry, Pure Bullet and Phantom Noise. His poems have been published and translated in Arabic, Chinese, Dutch, French, German, Hebrew, Italian, Polish, Serbo-Croatian, Spanish, and Swedish. His poetry and essays have been published in the New York Times, National Geographic, Poetry Daily, the Georgia Review, Virginia Quarterly Review, and other journals. He received a USA Hillcrest Fellowship in Literature, an NEA Literature Fellowship in Poetry, the Amy Lowell Traveling Fellowship, a US-Japan Friendship Commission Fellowship, the Poets Prize, and a fellowship from the Lennon Foundation. His most recent book of poetry, Phantom Noise, was shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize in England. Welcome, Brian. We will start with each other reading from their work, and then we'll take the conversation from there. So Donald, we'll begin with you.
Okay, before I read, I'd like to talk a little bit about what a commonplace book is, which is one of the things my new book has been called. Commonplace books were very common in the 19th century, before computers and folders and search engines and Google. Yeah, a commonplace book is meant to be the revelation of a person's consciousness. Got started, if you go back to the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, his Meditations is in effect a commonplace book. John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, Erasmus, people recorded their thoughts, their observations, quotations, in some cases, family recipes, family genealogy, scientific facts, parts of sermons. So that's kind of the background of the structure of this book. I'm going to read tonight the last 6 pages of the book. Ordinary life is more dangerous than war because nobody survives. Janet Burroway. Memory makes things more than they were. This isn't a problem, is it? Wreckage, a word that sounds like what it is. Say it. Humans, despite their artistic pretensions, their sophistication, and their many accomplishments, owe their existence to a 6-inch layer of topsoil and the fact that it rains. This morning, I've been trying to think about heaven, but without much success. Marilyn Robinson. The governor of Washington State signed legislation to permit composting as an alternative to burying or cremation of human remains. Supporters say the method is an environmentally friendly alternative to cremations, which releases carbon dioxide and particulates into the air, and conventional burial, in which people are drained of their blood and pumped full of formaldehyde and other chemicals that can pollute groundwater. Licensed facilities offer natural organic reduction, which turns a body mixed with wood chips and straw into about 2 wheelbarrows worth of soil in a span of several weeks. What man of you, if his son asked for bread, would give him a stone? The graveyards are full of indispensable men, Charles de Gaulle. All sins are attempts to fill voids, Seaman Weil. Removal of catheter after several weeks. You don't want part of any procedure that begins with take a deep breath, or a subsequent procedure that begins with you can leave your socks on. Our love, a difficult instrument we are learning to play. Practice, practice, C.D. Wright. Sisyphus, exhausted, left his rock for us. Dunya McHale. I learned late to focus on the ridiculously fortunate moments that have occurred for me, rather than on how I wish my life were. Also, these many moments of ridiculous luck have, for the most part, it must be said, been undeserved. All I can think of is how terrifying spring is in its tireless, mindless replications. Kim Adonzio. What to put on your tombstone? I knew this would happen. Dan Jenkins. I ache in the places where I used to play. Leonard Cohen. When does empathy actually reinforce the pain it wants to console? Does giving people a space to talk about their disease, probe it, gaze at it, share it, help them move through it, or simply sharpen its hold? Leslie Jameson. Painting from nature is not copying the object. It is realizing one's sensations. Paul Cézanne. Most of us rail against injustice from a position of personal safety. It is not that this is not admirable, but it's right to understand it for what it is. The emperor who ordered construction of the Great Wall of China also ordered the burning of all the books in his kingdom. When you find out root canals aren't permanent, that Leonardo da Vinci was the illegitimate child of a 15-year-old orphan from the Tuscan town of Vinci. We forget we have blood in us until it starts coming out. Jim Harrison. The kindness of strangers. How iffy is that? What my father would say. You see a frog atop a fence post? Do you know what you know? I will tell you. He didn't get there himself. What I should have said to my colleagues in the English department before I retired, remember how you used to read before you became so smart. People who don't read have only the experience of their lives. Life is not a spectacle or a feast, it is a predicament, George Santayana. And your device of comprehension, a book? There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Leonard Cohen. When I got the diagnosis, the tumor and all, my wife said, brush your teeth like you were going to live another 20 years. The last thing you need during all of this is a toothache. Does the very act of thinking about the Holocaust diminish its horror by refusing to treat it? Is unthinkable? James Carroll. H.L. Mencken on Puritanism, the haunting fear that someone, somewhere, might be happy. Fritz Haber, the inventor of Cyclone B, was a Jew. Books once written, what further need of their authors? An author is responsible for everything that appears in his books. If he claims that reality requires his depiction of the sexual, in addition to having a misguided aesthetic, he is a liar, since we shall surely see how few of his precious passages are devoted to chewing cabbage, hand washing, sneezing, sitting on the stool, or if you prefer, filling out forms, washing floors, cheering teams. William Gass. Why does it sadden reader to realize he will almost certainly never know what book will be the last he ever read? David Markson. What is literature but words worth repeating that bear repeating? Books do furnish a room. My birthday surfaced as draft lottery number 1 in the 1970 drawings. A college senior, I rushed to join Air Force ROTC. My immediate plan was to avoid the walking tour of Southeast Asia. Not lost on me was that more soldiers were being buried than airmen. But what I failed to grasp when in my panic I contracted with the Air Force was that the draft lottery dates applied to that year's newly turned 19-year-old males. I turned 24 that summer and could have completed school, and soon, with the war seemingly winding down, moved past the specified draft age window, 19 to 25-year-olds. I'd been born on July 9th, all right, but July 9th, 1946, not 1951. I entered military active duty because I misinterpreted what the lottery meant for me. 2 years before, 1968, the USS Pueblo had been seized by the North Koreans. Martin Luther King Jr. was removed. Robert Kennedy, riots and fires, DC, Baltimore, Chicago, exceeding eventually 100 cities, a Tet offensive at home. Fear and peril felt yeasty. All the while I was enrolled in ROTC, I believed I had, in an acceptable way, dodged war. But when I received my first ROTC check, $100 a month, I felt bothered enough to donate the sum to the American Red Cross. But I needed the money. So after giving away the first check, I kept them. I did, though, donate blood every 6 weeks or so when the Red Cross set up to collect in the gym. All service ROTC classrooms were housed in the same building as the gym, and everyone knew the blood collected was being shipped to Southeast Asia. I donated the blood, drank the Tang, ate the Oreos, and tried not to chafe at the inspiring Marine ROTC midshipmen who would arrive in noisy squads, an enthusiastic arrangement that allowed for competition as to who could fill his blood bag soonest. These embryo Marines brought handballs to squeeze and clipboards and charts and stopwatches. I worried for the Marine midshipmen then, as I would worry for them now. They could hardly wait to give blood. The average age of a soldier in Vietnam was 19. The average age of the 58,148 killed in Vietnam was 23 years. I joined the Air Force to avoid Vietnam and spent the next 22 years in the service. My military service wasn't, I believe, a mistake for me, though it would have hardly surfaced as a career choice without the undeclared 15-year war in Southeastern Asia. In 1970, besides confusing the rules of the lottery draft, I also managed to select a single service willing to commission colorblind officers, or as the government puts it, color vision deficient persons. I'm colorblind, but that's not what kept me out of war. It wasn't ROTC or the Air Force either. It was luck. What happened 11 months before my birth? At 8:16 a.m. on August 6, 1945, a fission weapon containing 64 kilograms of uranium detonated 580 meters above the Japanese city of Hiroshima. And Einstein's equation proved mercilessly accurate. The bomb itself was extremely inefficient. Just 1 kilogram of the uranium underwent fission and only 700 milligrams of mass. The weight of a butterfly was converted into energy, but it was enough to obliterate an entire city in a fraction of a second. Some 78,000 people died instantly or immediately afterward, vaporized, crushed, incinerated. Adam Higginbotham. What happened 74 years later? Malignant neoplasm. That's what the doctor called the tumor. He showed me. With the camera up my dick and into the bladder, I was able to take in the view. Turn the screen for him, the doctor said to his assistant. What I saw looked vegetative, like something you might see in the ocean, near coral, say. But it reminded me that Mussolini said watching bombs from the air was like watching flowers bloom. Where did I get the idea that I could go to the doctor once and it would be over? A close friend explained that his mother had penned a letter to be read to her children upon her death. Fearing she would die young, she wrote it in 1962. She lived an additional 36 years, dying at 93. One of the 11 children, my friend Paul, sat at the Thanksgiving table. Yes, she died on Thanksgiving, to hear the newly opened letter's content. The oldest son stood to read, starting with the inscribed name of each child. Paul told me his mother forgot to list one of her sons. Fragments indeed, as if there were anything left to break. Thank you.
That's phenomenal, Donald. We should just jump into the conversation and not have me sort of yammer on for a bit here, but I'll read a passage from the memoir, My Life as a Foreign Country, and then there's a piece that I think is in some ways in conversation with some of that last portion of what Donald was talking about too. There's some echoes, I think. After the latest mortar landed, after the explosion, after the initial run into the concrete bunker that served as our overhead cover, Bruzik yelled, "Grab the aid bag." I chucked him the bag and he ran on ahead as I struggled to keep up, my old ankle surgery slowing me down. The Turkish cook lay prostrate on the dirt road near the camp perimeter. His two friends, fellow cooks from the dining facility, stood nearby, their bodies bending at the waist a little, pressing their hands hard into their stomachs and then raising them to their mouths, their fingers opening then closing to white-knuckled fists as they gathered the Turkish escaping from their lips the way those in trauma sometimes do, struggling to keep from announcing to the world all that their eyes tell them is true. The cook foamed at the mouth. His eyes began to join the cloud layer in the stratosphere above. The shrapnel lodged in the back of his skull had punctured through bone to split the soft matter of the brain somewhere deep within the convoluted house of memory. Another soldier reached him before us and was attempting to render aid, but it was obviously too late. A mechanic was there too, kicking open an Israeli stretcher while still wearing a welding hood with the visor flipped up. The cook now found himself in Istanbul, and the streets of Istanbul had buckled and twisted until the roadway split open. Shopfront windows on Istiklal Kadisi exploded outwards in shards as pedestrians scrambled to regain their footing, some of them screaming, some of them staring at the broken world in disbelief. Beyond the dome of the Blue Mosque and the pink walls of the Hagia Sophia, the Bosphorus itself had been rent in two. People on the shoreline watched in horror as the waters sank into the depths of the splitting earth, sheared away. Their mouths opened in silence as they watched the Asian side of Istanbul rise up, the laws of gravity and physics undone before them, the way one might pull a small tree from the ground by its roots and lift it. It rose into the clouds, which parted and then disappeared into the vast blue reaches of sky beyond. The dying man stood near the Blue Mosque. He could hear the call to azan broadcasting from speakers high up in the minarets, echoed minaret by minaret throughout the city. His wife and daughter ran toward him and across the road, but just as they entered the street, the earth shook and buckled once more, and they began to rise over the pavement like strange swimmers in light, or featherless birds. They rose higher and higher as he stood there and watched them disappear. As we tried to staunch the blood and Humvee arrived to cart him off to the cache, blood began to flow through the cracks into the streets and parks of Istanbul. It flooded everything, spilling into the flower beds, spreading through the relics and statues and exhibits at the Archaeological Museum, where Polyhymnia placed a finger to her lips and fell silent. The Alexander sarcophagus overturned, and blood coated its insides. Blood poured into the old basilica cistern beneath the city, where the column pedestal of Medusa's marble head stared through the warm fluid at the wide eyes of fish, who turned to stone and sank finally to their ruin. The widening river of blood ran through bathhouses and bookstores. It ran through the streets and poured through the windows to flood the homes and businesses where people lived and worked. It overtook cars as their drivers and passengers sat frozen in shock. The blood began to fill the harem's quarters in the Topkapi Palace then, and it overturned carts and fabrics and spices and gold in the Grand Bazaar, where tourists cried out in whatever language they knew that this must surely be the end of the world. And the dying man knew it. His mouth continued to foam open as we stood over him, lifting him and lowering him carefully onto the stretcher that would take him away. When I looked in his eyes, seagulls circled the beautiful dome of the Blue Mosque, and for a moment, the call to azan rang through the curving horns of his ears. I'm going to read another passage from another thing, but the reason I picked that in part, maybe this might start some conversation at some point later, is that book's nonfiction, right? But what the hell is all that about? Like, I have no idea what was in this man's mind as he passed away. But I remember as I was writing this book and I was thinking my way through this, through my life, I was trying to think, these losses that I saw in front of me. What is that when we say loss? What is being lost? What is that process? And I don't think that's it, but it's an attempt at getting towards it, So I'm working on a new book the last year and a half, 2 years or so. And this is a piece called, this is also it's a part of a memoir, and it's called Anahuac Atoll, which is out in the Pacific. It's 1966. In the Pacific, a breeze riffles through the dry crowns of coconut palms as Marshall, who's my father, as Marshall seals his mask and blows out the mouthpiece of the snorkel to clear the tube. He's up to his chest in the warm water of the lagoon, which fades from a creamy turquoise to a midnight blue at its deepest point, 180 feet down. Cumulus blooms to 7,000 feet and then vanishes into the atmosphere in clusters across the sky, the departure of each cloud as enigmatic and ephemeral as its formation. It is a slow blue afternoon. A ring of tiny islets 50 miles in circumference and 23 miles across creates the nearly circular atoll, Anahuac, which lies a few feet above sea level at most on a landmass that rose from the ocean floor to become a seamount of basalt sometime during the Cretaceous period, when pterosaurs soared on thermal updrafts and their shadows cast over plesiosaurs giving birth in the ocean below. Marshall emailed me about this in late summer 2012, and this is from his email. Crystal clear water, beautiful coral and fishes totally unafraid of humans. I once swam alongside a big sea turtle and petted its back. It swam faster than I could keep up with. Swam alongside a stingray, didn't attempt to pet it. Checked out some of the sunken tanks, landing craft, and other detritus of the 3-day battle for that tiny island. Never swam inside one, out of respect for the dead, though I don't know that anything would have remained of them after 20 years. Also, didn't want to come face to face with a shark in one of them. Schools of zebrafish and parrotfish swam in and out of them, and down by the coral, there were always spiny sea urchins and the occasional toxic rockfish, both of which we'd been warned against touching during our orientation. At the orientation, we were instructed not to eat the coconuts or any fish we caught because they were radioactive due to an atom test back in the 50s. It would be okay if we gave our fish catches to the chamorros, the fishermen who occasionally paddled to the east end of the island at night. They'd make a fire and cook their, what else, fish. I almost went into shock when I heard that. And to their credit, so did the other newcomers. I wish I'd followed up with Marshall more about that testing, the damage done, what it's done to those who've inhabited the islands for over a millennium. Did he know that from 48 to 58, the US conducted 44 separate detonations, exploding more than 31 megatons of explosives? The first thermonuclear device ever tested at full scale, a hydrogen bomb that worked through nuclear fusion, nicknamed Ivy Mike, erased most of the tiny island of Elegy on the northern ring of the atoll, blasting a mile-wide crater 160 feet deep. The levels of radioactivity at Anahuac, even to this day, are exponentially higher than those in the Chernobyl exclusion zone or at Fukushima. Think plutonium-239, plutonium-240. The latter has a half-life of 6,560 years, and the former, 24,100 years. The fruit of the pandan tree, peeled of its husk, echoes the burnt orange light at the ocean at sundown. Soon enough, streaks will sizzle on the grill, and Marshall and his buddy Beauchamp will drink from chilled bottles of San Miguel. The missions, the Russians, the adrenaline, his own spy plane climbing into the atmosphere. There will be time for all of this. There will be time to return stateside, to start a family, for 2 daughters to be given names, a divorce, a new marriage, a 7-year-old son. The decades blurring by until that son flies across country on an emergency flight to see him on the last day of his life. There, before Marshall is intubated, a machine regulating oxygen into his lungs while his eyes scan the room, and those who love him gather in the ICU, each of us telling him how much we love him, saying our goodbyes. It was August 2015, almost a year before your own crossing, Elise, as they say. And I couldn't talk with you about it when I came home. I was a son who couldn't grieve. How could I? Imagine how cruel that would have been. Instead, I had to push it all down somewhere inside of me, where Marshall is still, even now, swimming, his mask cleared, a snorkel in his mouth, there in the lagoon, in the blue mouth of a dead volcano, in that watery pool of ink where stingrays spread their silent wings and fly beside him in the turquoise-colored water, while a bright ball of fire burns dusk, burns dawn, each day into the Pacific. Hey, thanks, Donald, for letting me read with you tonight. It's such an honor.
I have to unmute myself.
Yeah.
The cadence of that, Brian, is just beautiful.
You know, I wanted to read it because you and I know this, but nobody else here, I think, knows this. But in that period right after his passing, I think it was September or October. It was so close. You had me at the Air Force Academy, and I was there. I believe Dave Janetta's in on this in this group here today too, and you know, thanks to Dave as well for that. But I know you were very kind about that, because I know you were trying to care for me and make sure you didn't. I think you'd said, you know, hey, look, if we want to reschedule whatever, but I wanted to be there. And then while I was there, you know, I really appreciate how human you are and how you helped me through part of that time. So,
well,
yeah,
it's always been our pleasure to have you at the Academy.
Yeah. But we should talk shop, right?
Yeah,
so,
we
the
got to
cadence.
talk
Yeah,
shop.
right.
I'm interested, Brian, is if there's a shift in your brain when you're writing poetry, or if you're writing prose, or is it the same cloth? Because there's lots of cadence in your prose.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes to my dad when I was Marshall was just talking about, and I wonder how it is for you as well. It's because maybe I'll flip the question in a second, but with me, a lot of it was I was very shy. I had a massive stammer when I was a kid, and it went all the way into my late 20s. Actually, joining the Army, that's one of the things that really helped me, was it kind of loosened up whatever was log jamming language in me. And because you had to speak with an outside voice, I couldn't just be quiet, you know. And that really helped a lot. I think what it was is I had like a kind of a freight train of language trying to get out of my head, and I just didn't know how to land a sentence. And right now, I'm not worried. I figure I'll figure it out, or I'll fuck it up, and then I'll make another sentence. Yeah. But yeah, the sentence is the basic unit across the genres, right? So it's listening to my dad when I was a kid. We would wash. He'd come back. He was a welder. After work, we'd have dinner. As I was doing the dishes, he would read novels and poetry and stuff at the table, and he would just listen to literature out loud, you know.
Oh, wow.
So I think I learned how to read from him. Yeah.
That's interesting. My father made up stories about enchanted bulls with magic horns that you could unscrew and have all the ice cream you wanted. And there were always big-headed dogs in these stories, but I think I picked up the storytelling from him.
Yeah. And how to put different pieces of the story. Well, wondering how that might connect to fragments as well, maybe.
Well, the fragment thing, that happened to me when I wrote the memoir, Gathering Noise from My Life.
Mm-hmm.
I sat down to write a traditional, conventional memoir. My name is Donald Anderson. I was born in 1946, one consequence of armistice. My father, Donald Arthur Anderson, you know. But what happened to me as I was trying to write that memoir is I kept thinking about things that I'd read. And fortunately, I was doing it late in my life. And I began to realize that we are what we've read and where we've been. And writers have rich lives because they read. And you're able to make references, and pretty soon the whole book was about things that were associated, not things that were chronological. I think chronological is a phony imposition on life. I don't know.
Yeah, because every night, right, we close our eyes and we're already in that synaptic gap between one day to another kind of thing. We have to have a sleep of faith. We're going to wake up in the morning or something, and we wake up and then it's another chapter, version, fragment. We're already broken in pieces, you know.
And the other thing for me, Brian, was that I did understand that my life was not that important, but that it gained in importance if I wrote my history with a small h in history with a big H. Mm-hmm. And all of our lives are that way. And one of the things with the new book, Fragments, I hope that people read it and see themselves in it, because I think it's possible, because we're all citizens of the same beautiful, flawed world. And I think our lives really do have meaning as it resonates off what's going on around us.
Do you find, because I find reading your book, Fragments, and also Gather Noise, but both of them, but maybe even it's heightened more in this book, that it just, I feel less alone reading the book. Like writers are often seen as these very solitary creatures that hold themselves up, and we do, right? Hammer away at a computer or whatever it is, a piece of paper, and we come out months later or years later with this thing, a book. But your book is in this wild conversation across the landscape of time with these brilliant, radiant people, and I feel like I get to be that guest that gets to listen in and sit at the table.
I hope that's true. Yeah.
Oh, no, it is. Yeah.
And I think it might be.
Because how did you go about gathering that, over time?
Oh, by keeping a commonplace book. When you read or hear something or see something in the newspaper that makes sense, I write it down. And then I try to make sense out of it later. But yeah, it's not really that complicated. It's just you have to pay attention. Our buddy Benjamin Bush, he said to me that it's really about just paying attention, noticing. But I think that's something writers do. I think they notice.
Well, there's the noticing part, but then what fascinates me too about this book is then you had to find your way through all of it in a way that creates a journey that is a novel, right?
Well, we're calling it that because that's what the marketing people they changed my title, the publisher. My original title was The Noise Words Make, a nonfiction novel, which I really liked.
Yeah.
But their marketing people said no. So my solution to that was I've started a new book that's titled The Noise Words Make. So, So talk about your new book. I've read it, but other people haven't because it's in manuscript.
Yeah, I thought
it's titled.
It's called. Well, I got the title from Elise in one of her poems. She's talking about this time we went here, and I'm in Orlando, Florida, and we went to this alligator refuge, and in there they have a parakeet enclosure that's pretty big, and you can go in there and get like little sticks with sugar on them and stuff, and you can feed the parakeet, and they fly on your shoulders and they're everywhere and they're flapping. It really is, you feel like you're 7 years old again, kind of thing, and as much as I tried to be adult about it, there's no way to be adult about it, and it was fun, and we're inside there. And so in her poem she talks about this engulfment and this wild delight of wild things, and she says, I hope we'll have that again, as she knows she's fighting cancer as she's writing these poems, and that's part of her living inside of this journey, not knowing where it was going to end necessarily, at that point. And so I thought, I took that as, that's just a beautiful thought for one, but then I took that as my sort of charge, the wild delight of wild things, and I wanted to make and I thought, what's a challenge? I thought, well, 100 very short essays that would be not quite micro essays, but they'd be under say 1,200 to 1,500 words. I think 1,800 was the top. I fudged it a bit on a couple, went out to 1,800, I think. But and then I thought it'd be a challenge for me as a writer, also just to as a study in form and learning that space, to what is possible in that space. And then I thought each one has to have some type of delight or fascination or curiosity with nature. Yeah. And at the same time, I have to be in conversation with her and memory. And so it was sort of, that was my across. And so it was a journey across them. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really a commonplace book too. It's fragments. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that a man's life consists in what he's thinking about all day. And if you take that to be true and then write down what you're thinking or observing, or you have a book. That's the thing about it. I think there's more writers out there than people know, because a book is really just a good idea executed, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, George, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, George Perec. I think sometimes he'd write like sitting at a cafe, and he would just write, he'd try to get the life lived. I know Hemingway talked about that too, trying to get the actual life lived kind of thing. But the way Perec did it was if a bus went by, he would describe the smear of light on the metal, and it's going, and just almost like free writing all the time.
Yeah.
Every sense that came in, trying to capture it and write it down real quick. And I like the fragmented style a little bit better, because that smooth pull across it feels similar to how you said. It seems like that smooth, continuous narrative feels false to me. And like writing My Life as a Foreign Country, I could have written we locked and loaded on December 3rd and crossed the border, and then it's just not how, how do I write about me standing on the tarmac with an M4 in my hand, and I'm thinking about getting on the plane that goes to Iraq, without talking about the Civil War and World War I and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, because they're all together,
Yeah. It's all associative. Chronology is overrated. It's why I tell my students topic sentences are overrated. I don't want your thesis, because writers don't write about just one thing ever. Yeah.
How do you think about time? Like, for example, when I'm writing fragments, sometimes I wish I could, in English, we read from left to right and we flip the pages over, but it's only because I'm burdened by that process. I mean, I do the best I can in that, but if I could, I would have it would be more like a chord. There'd be 3 or 4 different things that happened at different time periods, and you just sort of and understand them or experience them, and then you move on to the next group of. It'd be like the stratigraphy of a mountain when you sheared it, and you could see the different epochs or something.
Well, memory is fragmented. I mean, a smell or a song can suddenly take you somewhere you don't belong. We are not in charge of our memories. And I had a professor at Cornell who kept trying to convince me that imagination is a faculty of memory, that it's the way we make sense of our memories. It's not separate.
Yeah.
It's a faculty of memory. And that kind of makes sense to me.
That's why, thank you for that, because that's why I push away from George Perec writing that freestyle thing of just every single thing without sort of pausing to reflect on things and absorb them somewhere, metabolize it. Because your work seems to metabolize the fragments, so it becomes part of a larger understanding rather. Yeah. I can see over on the side, I don't know if you see this on, but there's some questions in the sidebar for us over here.
Oh, there are? Let me see if I can find that special thing. But it's covering your face.
One of them is how's your writing process changed over the years?
Go ahead.
Oh, I asked you that. I just read it.
I finally given in to the way my mind actually works. That's from one of my best students ever, Ashley Ham.
I need that on a T-shirt. Yeah.
Yeah. I began to just trust it and not worry about. Well, I think this happened to me. People talk about art is there to impose order. And I don't think that's true, because I think art is there to expose enough disorder that it begins to resemble life. It's not about order; it's about disorder. But has your process changed? See, I don't think mine has really.
I mean, maybe just in a very practical sense. I write often on the computer screen rather than a paper like I used to.
I'm doing that more too.
Yeah. And I kind of think I'm messing up doing that. Like I should maybe be writing on paper, because I would go through the same line. It was very sort of repetitive, because I was really that what you mentioned before, trying to get the rhythm of the language in my body. But I think now I know when I can feel it in my body. I know the instrument enough, that I don't need to do that so much, but I do it anyways, walking around the house. I don't know if you do that. Like, do you get a phrase in your head and you just walk around with it?
Well, I have to take my phone and record it because my short term's going.
Yeah.
I do. I do. Okay, now what somebody's saying here? These are intense and personal topics. Do you ever find anything not publishable or a line you cannot cross? Well, yeah, I never write about Ellen, Brian. Because it's
Good man.
Yeah. That's the line I won't cross.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll write about my kids, but not Ellen, because it would be dangerous.
There's one that says in the Middle East, was I influenced by any Middle Eastern writers, specifically poets? I think Donald could probably have that one as well. But for me, when I went to Iraq, I had in my assault pack an anthology of poetry from King's College London, 2003, a book called Iraqi Poetry Today. It's a fine anthology. Yeah. And so those poets were with me while I was there.
And you've done quite a bit of work with McHale.
Yeah. We've read together in Paris and in Oklahoma. It's very it's been kind of amazing, and of course they're at the Air Force Academy, and there's some phenomenal poets. I have my favorite translator is probably Khaled Natawa, and he's done translations of Khaled Al-Azawi and Sadi Youssef and Maram Al-Masri. So I ended up writing him a fan letter after he did the book by Maram Al-Masri. It's called Red Cherries on a White Tiled Floor. It's my first fan letter to a translator. We should write more of them. Yeah, they do great work. Yeah. So there's the one, Donald, that says, can we talk about the role of the imagination?
Well, I think I did. I think the imagination is a faculty of memory, and we do it in dreams. In dreams, we have all these things that have happened at different times during the week, and your dreams put them together. I mean, you might have lost your wallet at Walmart, and your next door neighbor's dog got run over by a car, and there was a meteorite the night before that, and China's rocket fell into the Indian Ocean, and somehow in your dream it all goes together. And I think we need to trust our dreams a little bit.
Yeah, and the imagination maybe wholesale in some ways. What I mean by that is when I was a machinist, and I remember finding out that I had been accepted in the University of Oregon's MFA program back in the 90s. And I remember turning to my supervisor, great guy. He was like an older brother to me, very much a role model. And I remember him hugging me and cheering me on, like, congratulate, even though he knew he was going to have to hire somebody and replace me and stuff. And I remember him saying, well, what are you going to do after? Like, yeah, go ahead and do the dream thing, but what do you do after, right? Because like poetry and stories, and they're not like real, like the things when you make some, and that it seems sad to me, and I'm sure if he was here, he'd probably correct me on it, but that was my perception at the time. But I've seen it to a lot of our culture that doesn't really value the imagination in the way we might value like a loaf of bread, and I get that because I love bread, but it's like at the same time, like everything is in the imagination, other than like this foaming crest of the wave of the word now, the salty foam that smashes into the shore, and then up, and then does it again, and then up, and then what I mean, like we're just barely in the present moment. And some people say we're not even in that because it takes part of a fraction of a second for our brain to register the thing that just happened. So we're not even in the now.
I think people misunderstand what imagination is. They think imagination is making stuff up.
Yeah.
And people at the academy have said that, well, what do you, in your books, you just make shit up, right? And you say, yeah. the biggest insult I ever got about being a writer was at a cocktail
Mm.
party once. And this guy walked over to me and he said, "Understand you're a writer, right?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I thought if I was ever like in a car accident and became a quadriplegic, that I'd start writing science fiction novels. What do you think of that idea?" And I said, "That sounds like a really good idea." But
Right.
they think
Man.
imagination is just invention. And I
Yeah.
think I think it's a connective tissue is what I think it is.
Yeah. You know that, and that, so because I like the only way I can visit my father right now is in memory,
Yes.
and so I have to make him as alive as I can possibly, and I have to visit that space with my full self to be able to inhabit, to slip from this time to another, and imagination is that space where we can, or my wife Elise, I'll never kiss her again unless I do it in imagination, so connective tissue is totally right. I see Birch Bark Editing asks us, how did Donald organize and align the fragments in his novel?
I have no idea.
You're not giving the secret sauce away. Yeah,
Well,
you're gonna have to get your own recipe, folks.
and I think you just have, there's Ben Fountain. He knows about imagination. Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk is the
Yeah.
most inventive book about war I've ever read. Every page in that book shines. He's sort of our generation's Stephen Crane, as far as I'm concerned.
And to boot, he's a nice guy when you meet him.
Yeah, I know.
Like
I
usually
know.
people like that are just insufferable, but he's actually a nice person too.
Yeah.
He asks, Ben asks, do you think imagination is like a muscle? That is, does it get stronger the more you use it?
I have no idea. I really don't know. And I bet if you ask Ben how he wrote his book, he would say he didn't know either. You just do the work.
Yeah.
I don't know. You put down words and then you find better words, and then you try to replace the better words with the best words. And I don't know. I don't have answers for formulas. I really don't. And
it's something sometimes in the body, right? Do you feel like
I don't hate writing. I kind of enjoy it.
Yeah. Do you have like a Hemingway's bullshit detector inside? You have to like recalibrate it for everything, and you gotta.
I think that's a good thing for everybody to have. Yeah, I don't think it's special for writing. There's plenty of bullshit to detect. That's sure.
Yeah. But I mean, in a sense, maybe in revision, when you're going back, you got a thing and you're going back to see if you can work on this word or that word. And,
well,
is it kind of like a thing where your body responds to it? Maybe even because sometimes the mind has its intentions. But
see, my notion of literary criticism for all of those scholars out there, if I read something that makes me jealous, it's good. That's my literary criticism. And if I read something and it's good, I try to read it again to see how it happened, because it's all a magic trick. I mean, it's writing is a lot like being a stand-up comedian. It's all timing, don't you think?
Yeah, and if it's if there's a formula, then I don't want to be involved in that.
No,
because that's
most of us in high school wrote the outline of our essays after we wrote the essay.
Yeah, I'm still doing that because I'll get to a book, but that means I wrote 2 or 3 other books just to get to that one. So the one that I read the fragment from, that started as a novel about the wall. I wrote that, and it's a terrible book, and then it's all fiction. And then there was one scene in there I thought, that's an interesting. So I ended up as the sci-fi thing about the dead and memory and stuff. I wrote that book. It needs a lot of work. But then I found one little fragment in there that is about, that led me to the book that I shared with you, So
yeah. Well, you got to get that book out. Someone asked us what books we're reading. I am reading at the moment the biography of Philip Roth, and just enjoying the fact that my life is better than Philip Roth's life, that I'm happier and not as mean and not as nasty and happier. I don't know. it's a distressing biography, actually. I'm about 3/4 through it. What are you reading, Brian?
Well, I pulled it over here from it's Fadi Judah's footnotes in the order of disappearance. It's a book of poems. It's Fadi Judah's work is just is phenomenal. And I'm going back and rereading a book called Frankenstein in Baghdad, a novel. It's wonderful, yeah, and it's connected to. I mean, just the title itself was something I remember thinking maybe we might talk about tonight, and before this started, because this idea. I won't give the book away, but there's an explosion. A lot of people are killed. There's an Iraqi person who dies, and then talks with another ghost who says, "You got to find your body. You got to get back inside your body. It's real important." And the guy's like, "But I don't have. It's gone. I don't have a body anymore, because this explosion destroyed it, So he starts piecing together from different explosions around the city and making a body in this one thing. So, I mean, please, people, check out Frankenstein in Baghdad. And it's something I've been saying for about 15 years is that some of the work I've done is a kind of a placeholder waiting for the Iraqis to for that work to be made and to be translated across the water. And I'll learn more about the war that I was in.
Yeah. Before I started the biography, I reread Peter Matheson's Shadow Country, the great novel about Florida, the beginning of Florida.
I have to read that. I haven't read that.
Oh, it's an astonishing book. It's a great book.
I think we could do this all night.
Are we out of time?
But we are running out of time. So we want to thank you so much for your magic trips and for this lively conversation. The questions just keep pouring in. So it seems like you need to do it again because people still want to know more.
I want to thank Brian. I always like seeing you.
It's an honor to be here with you, Donald. And I hope next time it'll be in person too. So
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, thanks to all the people who attended. I know it's not a convenient time for everybody, and it's okay. All right. Thank you. All right.
This is my copy. Nobody gets this one. This is mine. So
we gave you all the link to buy your own. So thank you everybody for coming tonight, and we hope we'll see you again. Thank you, Donald and Brian.
Thanks to Birch Bark Editing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
yeah.